So remember, we started to see these racial segregation laws in what time period?
1920?
Earlier.
1900s.
1890s. Okay? They were adopted into the southern states. And the scope of the Jim Crow laws is listed. We saw racial segregation. We've been looking at, with Brown versus the board, racial segregation in public schools. But remember, Brown versus the board was sort of the stepping stone for African Americans and the rest of the country to say, hey, segregation is now deemed illegal by the Supreme Court in the public schools. Let's look at it in other aspects of life, right? And that's sort of what happened within the Rosa Parks. They looked at segregation within the buses. But the scope of segregation was further than just the schools and the buses, right? It went hospitals, public parks, railroad cars, public buildings with the separate but equal facilities, prisons, restaurants, lunch counters. We're going to start to see, yesterday towards the end of the Rosa Parks video, we started to see who emerges the leader of the Civil Rights Movement. He just sort of naturally emerged through his speaking abilities. What? Yeah, he's speaking in a church, and that lady said, I had never heard of Martin Luther King, but the first time I see him speak, I say, our leader has arrived. And what we're going to look at today, like the actual economic aspects of what made the bus boycott so successful. Remember, how long did the bus boycott go on for?
Over a year. 381 days.
Good job. 381 days for over a year in the South. Okay? So we've heard of Plessy versus Ferguson, right? We read about that in that Brown versus the Board of Education article on Monday. Remember, 1892, Homer Plessy, an African American, was refused a seat in a first-class railroad car even though he had paid for a first-class ticket. He challenged the segregation laws that permitted the railroad to deny him a first-class seat, and he pursued his challenge all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, but then he loses in the Supreme Court. Okay, the Supreme Court ruled against him in Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, saying separate but equal for blacks and whites did not violate equal protection under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. Okay? But then we're 1955, Rosa Parks, an African American riding on the bus in Montgomery, Alabama, was told to give up her seat for a white passenger, right? But she was sitting in what section of the bus?
Black.
She's sitting in the black section of the bus. That's important. A lot of people get that confused. She's in the black section of the bus, but the bus driver tells her to give up her seat for the white passenger. Okay, because there wasn't
pretty much
enough room.
got off the bus.
No, she didn't say get off. He said to give up her seat. What was she supposed to do?
Stand up.
Stand up. Right. She challenges the segregation laws underlying the incident, and she wins. Okay, and she wins through the Montgomery bus boycott. So what we're going to look at today is what explains the change between 1896 and 1955, and why was it possible to challenge Jim Crow laws in 1955 when Homer Plessy was not able to be successful in challenging them in the 1890s. Okay? So we're going to look at what was the economic change that happened between 1890 and 1955 that allowed Rosa Parks to be successful in her challenge, but that did not allow Homer Plessy to be successful in his challenge. Okay? We're going to dive into a few economic principles to look at that today. So I want to quickly have you think about this as we go through. Okay? When you think in terms of economics, I want you to think. In economics, people make choices, right? You choose every day, right? I stopped at Starbucks for my coffee. Where did you stop, Morgan? Her mom went to Burger King and got her coffee. What a nice mom. Where did you get your coffee?
My hotel.
Okay, at his hotel. Okay, so right, like within this room, there's 3 of us that have coffee from different places. Did you stop and get that, or did you have it at home? She had that at home. Okay, and I bet like as we went through the day, we could pick apart all of the different choices that you're going to make that are actually economic choices. Whether I drive through the Burger King drive-thru or the Starbucks, or pull into Quick Trip where I usually stop and get a coffee, but I didn't feel like getting out of the car this morning. So I went to Starbucks and paid the $3.50. We're going to look at the choices, okay? People's choices. And those choices involve costs. Okay, like I just said, normally I stop at Quick Trip and buy the $1 coffee, but today, because it was cold and I didn't want to get out of the car, I drove through and paid more for a coffee. Okay? So I want you to keep this in mind. What choices happened and what were the costs of these choices between 1890 and 1955? Okay? And people respond to incentives in predictable ways. Okay, what's an incentive? Something that's going to encourage you to do something or something that's going to discourage you to do something? It could do either, right? Incentives either encourage your behavior or discourage your behavior. Okay? Think for a second, what's an incentive you've seen to buy something lately? Everyone think. What? A commercial? Okay, a commercial that makes you want to buy something, want to have it. Good. I've been thinking from the commercials that I need to buy a little e-reader.
You don't.
So like you can read books on your little, the Nook or the,
just read them.
Or the Kindle. I don't know which one's better. I'm gonna look over spring break. I'll let you know. I'll let you know what choice I make. Okay. What's another thing? What's another incentive you'd see?
Convenience.
Convenience. What? Toys and cereal. Good. Okay, last night before I took my daughter to dance class, we went and ate at Chick-fil-A. Why might I go eat at Chick-fil-A on Tuesday?
Kids eat free.
Kids eat free.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So that's an incentive to go to Chick-fil-A on Tuesday, right? Okay, so we're going to look at what were the choices people made, what were the costs of those choices, and what incentives did they have to respond in a certain way, and how are those different 1890 to 1955? Okay, and we create economic systems that influence these choices and these incentives within our economy. Okay? People gain when they trade voluntarily, so I want you to think, how are people gaining? What are the costs and benefits? How are they gaining? And what are the gains and losses as we look at this situation? And then what consequences were going to have an impact on what lied in the future? Okay, when we're always thinking in terms of consequences, how is that going to impact the future? Okay, so we're going to look at this 1890, 1955, Homer Plessy, Rosa Parks in terms of economics. Now, economics was not the only thing, okay, that went ahead and made it successful for Rosa Parks. A lot of it had to do with what? Who is now in the Supreme Court? We now have some Supreme Court backing and Supreme Court decisions, right? We just had Brown versus the board pass. Okay, so it wasn't all economics, but I want you to see the economic side of why the boycotts were successful. Okay, when it wasn't successful for Homer Plessy in 1890. Okay, we are going to take 2 minutes and use, so why don't like you four come up to these 2 desks, and then we'll pull 2 more desks. I want to make a big circle, and I want you to have your packet and something to write with. Answer the questions for discussion. You have questions A through K for discussion. And then I want to have like a roundtable discussion on these questions. So you want to be prepared to answer any questions. Your answer that you give will be worth participation points. Not that you get it right, but that you have a good attempt. Go around in a circle and I'm gonna give you which question I want you to answer. Some questions we're gonna spend just 1 or 2 people on, others will spend a few more. What did the railroad gain? Question number 2. What did the railroad gain by refusing to let Mr. Plessy use his paid ticket to ride in a first-class car? Kevin?
They gained the money from white customers who probably would be angry if they had to ride with a black person.
Good. Gained the money from white customers that wouldn't have wanted to ride with African American customers, but they did more than that too. They followed the...
Wow.
Yes, thank you, David. They followed the state law. Question was, what did the railroad lose by refusing to let Mr. Plessy ride in first class? And he said they lost him as a customer, and who else?
Probably a few relatives or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
Few relatives, friends, other African Americans that heard about it might not want to ride. What did the bus company gain by having Rosa Parks arrested? What did the bus company actually gain? There should be several answers, so you might need to expand within yours on this. Kept white passengers happy? What else? Victoria, something else you can think of?
Would show like racial dominance.
Okay. What about city laws, John? Were they following city laws?
Yes.
Yes, they were following city laws, right? When the bus driver told Rosa Parks to give up her seat, he wasn't necessarily doing it because of the way he felt, right? He was following city laws. Okay, and I think that's important to realize too. So remember we heard about in the video yesterday, not all white Americans felt the way that the segregation laws were. Hannah, what did the bus company lose by having Mrs. Parks arrested?
All the black riders.
Good. They lost the African American riders, and can you expand on that, Kyle? Why was that such a big deal?
African Americans were the majority of bus riders.
African Americans were the majority of the bus riders. So in doing this, the bus company loses the largest group of customers that they had. So when you lose your largest group of customers, what did you just lose a lot of, Matt?
Customers. Revenue.
Revenue, good. So they lost a lot of money, right? What actually happened to the bus companies because of loss of revenue?
Bad business.
They had to shut down, right? What did most white people do? Did all white people keep riding the bus? No? Leo, what white people stopped riding the bus? The ones that supported Rosa Parks in desegregation, right? So they not only lost African Americans, they also lost white people who supported desegregation. Okay, and they lost a lot of revenue. This is probably a key question here. Would a rail boycott have worked in 1892? What'd you say? Good. No, because a lot of African Americans did not ride first class. Costs, right? Because it was, relatively speaking, they couldn't afford to ride in the bus first class. What changes occurred that made the bus boycott effective in Montgomery? The change that happened though between 1890, when not a lot of blacks could afford to buy a first class ticket to 1955 when the majority, like Matt said, of the bus company's customers were African Americans. What change occurred?
But then started making more money.
They started making more money, right? There's that whole article about how incomes rose. Okay? So they start making more money, so what else happens? Do they have, think in terms of choice. What happens in terms of choices, right? Cars come out, so what do they have now?
Different ways.
Different alternatives, right? Remember in the Rosa Parks video, we saw the DJ was like giving codes of where to meet, and then people could go by car too, and they had the big carpools. They even had people riding in hearse, right? So they had different alternatives to riding the bus. Okay. Can consumers influence social change? Yeah. This is the perfect example of consumers can influence, right? What happened to the bus system in Montgomery? It essentially was shut down, right? Because of the boycott. They lost huge amounts of revenue. People had other alternatives that they could use during the boycott. They were walking, they were carpooling, right? They had taxis that were giving free rides. We saw all about those things. So, yes, consumers can influence social change. What's a modern day example of consumers influencing social change? Everyone think for 10 seconds of a modern example of something you see maybe even in the last 10 years of consumers influencing social change.
BP.
Okay, BP lost a lot of business after the oil because people blamed, the loss of a lot of animal and environmental life to it. Okay, Kay, was it the economic actions like the boycott alone that caused social change? And I kind of touched on this a little bit anyways. Nick? No, it was also the protests, and what else was it?
Sit-ins.
And changes in the Supreme Court, right? Supreme Court decisions. Because the Supreme Court for the first time was saying segregation is not equitable. Okay, stay right there. I'm going to have you add one question to this, and then we're going to move on to Martin Luther King. Add the answer to this question to this sheet of paper. Using economic reasoning, I want you to formulate your own answer. I want it in a short paragraph, 3 to 5 sentences. Why was Rosa Parks successful in challenging a basic doctrine of racial segregation when Homer Plessy was not? What change? You should be able to answer this pretty easily in 3 to 5 sentences. What change occurred in the calculations people made about the costs and benefits of racial segregation? How did the costs and the benefits, remember what I showed you before, choice, incentives, alternatives, think about those things, incomes, and answer what change occurred in the calculations people made about the costs and benefits of racial segregation.